Well, welcome everyone. This is an awesome webinar that we just put together. David and I have been working on it today. And what we really wanted to do, and I know this isn't like a learning lab or anything like that. This is its own separate thing. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to record everything that we're talking about today: R, Shiny, AWS, Cloud, MongoDB, Bootstrap, all the different technologies that are out there. We're going to be making a video recording and make all the slides that you see today publicly available after this call. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. We're going to be doing several different demos throughout the talk, and we want to showcase a lot about what you can do with R, Shiny, and AWS, and also what's going on out there in industry, which is really prompting us to develop this training and also the course that I just recently published. With that said, just so everyone knows, we're going to be talking a lot about R, Shiny, and AWS, and the goal here is to expose you to some of these tools so you can understand what it takes to empower your organization to make decisions at scale with the cloud and with applications that you, the data scientist, actually builds yourselves. David, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. I'm David Curry, here to help Matt put on this super awesome presentation. I actually own a marketing analytics company, and we use R and Shiny as part of our work. One thing I would like to say is I have a background in web development. So I was a programmer. I started out maybe late 90s, about 98, and was a developer for almost 15 years and then moved into management and chief technology officer. So I think the discussion here will be pretty good because we can talk about the importance of putting your work into production and allowing other people to use it and bringing value to your organizations or your clients. So it should be super fun.
Right.
Topic.
And also, just to add to what David's saying, so David is actually doing a lot of work with our business science data, developing our backend, developing what we're calling the customer data platform, and really building out that infrastructure. He's actively using AWS every day for our purposes, and he's a really good resource for me too, because my background's more on the data science end. So it's helped me a lot in my progression just to be able to have conversations with him. You guys know me. My name is Matt. I'm the founder of Business Science. My goal is to help you succeed at data science. And I've just launched a brand new course. We now have well over 60 people in it. It's called Shiny Developer with AWS, and it really solves a need. So we'll talk a lot about that course, but really the purpose of this conversation is to be able to expose you to the tools that I use in that course and explain why I used them. And if you do want to take your applications into production, whether you take my course or not, you understand kind of what goes into it, some of the technologies, some of the buzzwords, and also kind of get a glimpse because we're going to do some demos inside. So the agenda, I want to walk everyone through this real quick before we get started. So we're going to, the first probably quarter of the presentation is going to be talking high level about some of the changes that are going on out there in the world around us, what organizations are doing particularly with predictive applications and the need for cloud technologies. So we're going to talk about these changes that are going on out there. Then what we'll do is we'll spend a good bit of time talking about the technologies and kind of split that up into 3 different segments. So we'll be talking about front-end technologies, we'll be talking about back-end technologies, and then we'll be talking about technologies that assist us with deployment. And then what we'll do is we'll end with Learning Made Simple. I'm actually going to talk about the Shiny Developer with AWS course and give you guys kind of the just an overview of what that course covers and how it integrates a lot of the things that we're talking about today in this conversation. Okay. So one of the big things that we need to understand is that there's changes that are going on out there. And organizations, they're constantly evolving. Technology is evolving very fast. And what I'm seeing when I work with various companies that I consult for, when I talk with various students and find out what, it's like as they're becoming data scientists and as they're growing in the field, and it's becoming very clear that companies are going through this process of democratizing data. And what that means is they're taking the data that they have from, before it used to be just, a few high level executives that had access to all the data. Now what they're trying to do, organizations are pushing that decision making authority down to the ground floor, allowing employees that are in charge of specific customers, that are in charge of specific accounts, to be able to make data-driven decisions. And what they're doing is they're leveraging the data science team to be able to do that. And they're also leveraging cloud technologies to be able to scale that up beyond what the previous infrastructure has allowed them to do. So the two key things, they're wanting predictive applications, and they're wanting to use cloud technologies. So let's kind of divide that into two topics. We're going to take first the shift to predictive applications, and I'm going to talk about a few case studies that demonstrate what's going on. So data science is changing. It's becoming, more of a application-driven, more of this idea of data democratization. And it's stressing the data science teams because they're now having to shift from previously developing analytics through reports to now developing applications and taking these data products into production. So before it used to be descriptive reports and you'd use tools like Excel. Then it kind of went to descriptive dashboards where you're just, kind of making, let's say, a sales dashboard and presenting that to management. And that might have been done in Tableau or Power BI. And then it was the idea of machine learning, utilizing that to better understand your data on your customers, on your employees, on your manufacturing, on your suppliers. And that was done with Jupyter and our Markdown reporting. And then now what that's transitioning into is predictive applications. So instead of providing reports to, say, the executive level, now what the executives are wanting to do is to be able to develop applications that people at the ground floor can use. They can pull them up. They can see what's going on for a specific customer, understand why that customer is at risk of leaving, your being a customer, or why that employee is at risk of leaving the company, or manufacturing, why that product line is having so many defects and so on. So that's all predictive analytics. And what companies are wanting is to put that into actual applications. And they're using tools like Dash and Shiny to be able to develop those.
Yeah, Matt, could you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
Another important point about this is the descriptive dashboards and predictive reports. Quite often, if there isn't a push to go into predictive applications, the data science department will end up sort of being like an ad hoc reporting department where you get executives and other departments, reaching out saying, can you create this report for me? Can you create this dashboard for me? And that's not really the most efficient way to use data science. So creating applications where end users can use your analysis, sort of like bundle it and let them use it and make decisions off of it is definitely the way to go. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll talk about a little bit more about that part later, but I just wanted to point out the fact that quite often, if there isn't a push to go beyond just the reports, the department can end up just creating like ad hoc reports because people want different stuff, and you really want to be able to put the power in the hands of other people, not just the data scientists.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It's not the data scientist's job to run the company. It's the employees, whoever has authority over that customer or that, that process. So you want to give them the data, and you do that through applications. Exactly. Yeah. So here's an example of that. It's a company called Safe Auto. So Safe Auto is leading the charge in auto insurance. And what they're doing is they're utilizing these tools, these predictive analytics tools internally, so that way they can actually identify outliers. You know, when a customer has, or excuse me, when an anomaly has occurred. So here they've got a Shiny app, which is predicted versus observed payment counts for the last 90 days. And you can see that, you know, where there's this red dot here, that's an anomaly. This one here is an anomaly. So they predicted, and that's this yellow line. And then they've got the observed, which is this blue line. And you can see that right here, there was an anomaly. So this is an outlier here. So it's allowing their team, and that's not the data science team, the actual team that monitors these payments. So it might be the accounting team, for example. It's allowing the accounting department to be able to identify, oh, hey, we got an issue going on. I better look into this, find out what customers are having spikes in payments, and why is it, you know, why is it happening on this day when it should have been that day, and so on. So that's an example. So this was from John Kish. He's the CIO at Safe Auto Insurance, and he's saying here that, you know, our studio and our gave us what we need to deliver data science applications that our business depends on. So again, he's talking about the business depending on these applications. It's not the data science team, but it's the actual, you know, people doing the work that are in charge of these high profile accounts. It's allowing them to be able to make decisions. This is another company called Waze, and Waze was recently bought by Google, and they do a lot. They have their own traffic app, and it's actually an app that I actually use, especially if I go on you know, long road trips. It's really good for outsmarting traffic, but they're actually using and building Shiny apps to be able to help perform traffic analysis. So this is a gentleman, his name is Daniel Marcos. He's a Google Waze data wizard, and he utilizes a lot of these dashboards and visualizations with R to be able to develop these applications. And what he says here, the fastest time to market, that's key, because one of the great benefits of these frameworks like Shiny that we're going to talk about is that you can build an application very quickly, like one or two business days. That's all it takes for you to mock up a prototype application, and then there's other tools and things that you can add in once you've got your prototype to be able to convert that into an actual, you know, application that is internally facing or client facing. So you can do a lot with it, and we'll see that in this presentation. Okay, so that's an example of two companies that are utilizing applications to be able to help drive data decision making and this idea of data democratization. The next thing I want to talk about is change number 2, which is converting to cloud services now, and we're seeing this at the high level. A lot of companies are moving to the cloud. So, David, I don't know if you want to step in and talk about this slide on infrastructure and how it's changing to the cloud services.
Yeah, sure. So years, I don't even know when it started. I would say probably maybe late 2000, or late 2000, like 2009, 2010. A lot of the cloud infrastructure was really coming on the scene, and between 2010, 2015, companies were slowly moving their data and server infrastructure and everything to the cloud. I don't know how it is in your organization. Some of you may be at organizations where a lot of your databases and kind of hardware infrastructure is internal, but the push has really been going more and more towards a cloud because of scale, because of pricing. And Matt will talk about this in a minute, but AWS is one of the biggest players for cloud services. And they have a whole sort of entree of different offerings, everything from data science tools to Internet of Things tools to just everything. So the reason we're honing in on AWS is because it's very prominent. it'll look good on your resume or as a new skill set. And then also one thing I want to talk about is like company maturity. A lot of companies, particularly in data science, they don't have all of the skill sets that they need. So if you go in to a new organization or you bring a new skill set to your company, most likely it'll make you more valuable because now you have kind of a more balanced skill set. So not just data science, but also understanding how data science can work in the cloud, how you can package your analysis for other people to use it. But Jay, specifically on AWS, I think it's the prominent player, and that's one of the reasons we're going to be focusing on it in this conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's a huge change going on out there with this kind of migration from like David was saying back in 2009. AWS first came out. It was a lot of kind of smaller organizations that did some adoption, but now we're starting to see it at the bigger organization level as well. So let's talk a little bit about the biggest of the big. I'm going to talk about the Department of Defense. So this is just one example where we've got huge organization. I'm talking, this is the entire Department of Defense that's part of the government. They just signed a $10 billion, the largest cloud contract ever with Microsoft, and that's Microsoft Azure. It's this thing called the JEDI contract. I wrote about it yesterday. If you saw the newsletter that I sent out, it's worth up to about $10 billion over 10 years. And what the intent is that Microsoft's going to provide cloud services to help the Pentagon out with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the ability to process mission critical workloads. If you read between the lines, it's all data science. It's all machine learning and big data is basically what they're using it for. So the reason I'm bringing this up is not to say, hey, everyone go learn Microsoft. Microsoft just won this huge contract. Amazon's actually the market leader. So Amazon, AWS, they actually have the CIA. They have several other contracts. And you can see too, just the demand for, even beyond just the Department of Defense. But if you look at the entire global demand for cloud computing services. So this company, Cisco, which is it's a Fortune 500 company, they maintain this thing called the Cloud Computing or the Global Cloud Index. And obviously some of this data is forecasted into the future because we're not at 2020 and 2021 yet. But what they're tracking is how much workload is being utilized by in the cloud and also private data centers. And what they're seeing is that cloud data centers are growing 22%. And what this means is CAGR, that's compound annual growth rate. So that's a classic MBA term, CAGR. But that means every year it's growing 22% on average. And you can see that by the green. Conversely, the blue, which is the traditional data center, is decreasing. It's actually shrinking its market share 5% every year. So cloud is growing exponentially at 22% growth rate. And most companies, if they're not doing it now yet, probably within the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to be migrating their data centers into the cloud. It's just the direction that all companies, the Department of Defense, all the biggest companies like Walmart, Target, obviously you've got the big three, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. They're all actually building out this cloud infrastructure because it's such a high demand thing for companies, because it offloads their infrastructure. They don't need to maintain servers and huge overhead because of that. So the three biggest cloud players at a glance, it's Amazon, it's Microsoft, and it's Google Cloud Platform. So if you're getting into cloud and you want to learn one, you want to pick from one of these three most likely. And you can see that right here. This was a survey that was run by this company called RightScale that was run last year. And what they're doing is they're surveying a bunch of different companies, and the respondents, 68% of them were actually running apps with AWS. And that's probably even increased since then. 15% were experimenting in the experimentation phase. So if you kind of look at this like a funnel, you've got plan to use, you've got experimenting, and then running apps. You've got a lot of companies that are kind of flowing that way with AWS. Same thing with Azure. Azure is also, they're the number 2 player in popularity. And one of the things that they do, so AWS is very popular just with all companies because they were the first to do it, first mover, and also because they've built out a really amazing system and they've grown their tool set a lot. So think of some of the new technologies that have come out, like the SageMaker for machine learning, some of the IoT stuff. They're continuously building on to what they've got. So that's why AWS is number 1. Number 2 is Microsoft. So Microsoft's name is just very popular in the enterprise environment. So what we're seeing is that bigger companies are now transitioning rather than just smaller companies. So you've got the Department of Defense. They're doing a $10 billion contract, the largest ever. They're going with Microsoft, I'm sure because of the popularity, I'm sure because of the enterprise, just because they're popular with enterprise. And then you also have other companies. So Google Cloud's the third. I know there's a lot of people that are in my courses at Business Science University, and they come from a marketing background, and they're saying, hey, why'd you pick AWS for your course? Why didn't you do, Google Cloud? And this is why, because Google Cloud is actually not used that heavily out there yet. And that's not to say it won't, but it does have some niches, and it's really popular with digital marketing. Anytime any companies that are utilizing that are utilizing Google Analytics data, it's just a natural integration to go with the Google Cloud platform. It's still very popular. It's just not nearly as popular as Azure or AWS. Okay. So, David, I'm going to hand the slide off to you, but there's a couple problems. The first one is cloud is a lot to learn. So why is there so much to learn with the cloud, and what are some of the common technologies?
Yeah, the reason there's so much to learn is because I think the biggest cloud players are really trying to offer like a big suite of everything to just get people in the door. It's like, if you need a database, we got that. If you need Internet of Things, we got that. If you got data science, we got that. But then in doing so, there's different sort of sub technologies. You can imagine a database, there's different types of databases for different uses. So then they offer multiple types of databases. And it just really gets confusing quickly, which you can tell by this slide. I think on the left side, you can see you have it categorized by compute power, databases, networking, and application services. I think that's about right, because most companies are going to be, like, if they're moving their IT infrastructure to the cloud, it's mostly based on compute, networking to begin with, and then they branch into moving to databases and application services. So yeah, it's quite a mess across the board. I think Azure, they have Microsoft has a little bit more of a focus with their offerings, but it's still a wide offering. And then the same with Google Cloud as well. But one of the things that we're going to talk about in this particular discussion is how can we narrow it down to what's applicable for taking your data science analysis and getting it in the cloud, and not getting too confused with all of the different stuff they offer.
Yeah, we're definitely going to help you. This is one of the things that we put a lot of focus on with the recent course that we put out, is narrowing the scope of AWS to just specifically the things that you need in order to be able to do your job, which is to get an application into the cloud. So like David said, we're going to help you navigate that. We're going to help you kind of focus it in on the most popular technologies, and the things that you need to do to be aware of to do your job. All right, the second problem. So there's a lot to learn. It's very deep. We've got databases, networking, compute, but there's also multiple players. So there's like 15 different cloud players, and that we talked about the big three, which are Amazon, Microsoft, Google, but there's other companies like VMware, IBM. They all have these cloud technologies, and it's it can be okay. Like, which one do I learn? Do I try and learn all of them? So the problem that you're going to run into is eventually when your organization transitions into that, if they haven't done it already, you don't know which one that they're going to pick. So, to me, it doesn't make sense to try and learn all three. That's one strategy you could try and do, or learn, a bunch of them. But here's the thing, because their offerings are so similar, if you get familiar with one cloud offering, then you can actually apply what you've learned to the other ones. So just because you're learning AWS doesn't mean that you can't, that knowledge that you're learning on AWS doesn't, it'll transition to Google Cloud, or it will transition to Azure. It's just some slight differences, and you can just basically Google that online to see what the differences are. In fact, I did that, and it was kind of funny. The first thing that came up when I Googled Microsoft or AWS to Microsoft actually publishes a guide that has links for all the key technologies. So if you're currently using SageMaker, for example, you can see SageMaker over here for AWS. Azure has the comparable Azure machine learning service. So it's very easy to transition from one to the other. In fact, just this morning on my Medium feed, I got an email this morning, and this one, I thought it was so interesting that I just copied and pasted into the slide deck. But check this out. It's going from Redshift, which is Amazon's big data warehouse service, to GCP BigQuery, which is a Google Cloud Platform. That's their big data service. So going from Redshift to BigQuery, and look at this. It's a 4-minute read. So like, there's not a whole lot to it. So just learn one cloud technology, and that's going to give you basically, if you learn one, you've already learned them all. So just focus on one. My particular one that I'm choosing to focus on is AWS, and that's because it's the market leader right now. It's not to say Azure won't, eventually, who knows what's going to happen in 5 years. Heck, it could be Google, it could be some other company. But what we do know is that cloud technology is very important for businesses, so we need to at least start learning it.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to kind of pull this all together, what businesses now expect? They expect two things: apps and cloud. So in 2015, data scientists are developing reports using machine learning, and that's kind of what the executives wanted to see is, hey, what's going on with my business? How is that sales demand forecast going to, play out for the next couple of months? Now it's fast forward to 2020, next year, it's apps and cloud. So we want to be able to, instead of having reports that say the sales forecast, we want to deliver applications that include that sales forecast as part of a predictive analytics solution. So that way the decision makers in the manufacturing team or on the accounting team, they can start predicting what their cash flows are going to be at a much more accurate rate. So we want to be able to distribute these applications at scale. That means cloud. We want to be able to do predictive analytics. That means apps. So the game plan is, what we want to show off is how you can do this with R, Shiny, and AWS. So that's what we're talking about here. David, you want to talk about this slide?
Yeah, I like this one because the courses at Business Science use this business science problem framework that really focuses on aligning your work with a real business problem and having the output of your work create value. In some way you're resolving that problem, whether it's saving time, saving money, or giving some insight. So what this slide is depicting is taking your analysis and then putting it down into a Shiny web app. So at the bottom, you see analysis results, Bootstrap, and JavaScript. Shiny is a R framework that you use R code and Shiny libraries that, along with your analysis, that transposes the code into Bootstrap, which is CSS, and into JavaScript. So you don't have to write a whole lot of CSS. You don't have to write a whole lot of JavaScript. You write everything in Shiny. And then the app itself will transpose that code into different code. And so we're showing you how to do that and then how to push it into AWS. But it's important to understand that this is the end result. So this is more of an, I would say, intermediate to expert level. You're taking the end of all of your data science analysis, your machine learning models, and packaging it into a web app so that other people can use it. But I think what's important to see here is the different components that you're using in order to get that done.
Exactly. And so that was kind of the workflow that you go through in order to be able to really learn how to make an application. But what's also interesting, I think, is to think about it in terms of a specific problem and a specific solution, and seeing how the technologies kind of form around it in order to be able to lift that to where you want it to go. So one of the things that I'm a big fan of, and this is how I teach, and this is why I like to focus more on business problems and actual projects, is that when you, instead of trying to learn, oh, hey, I'm going to take my AWS certification, and that might take you, I don't know, 8 weeks or so. That's costing you 8 weeks, and you're going to end up learning a lot of stuff that you probably don't need to know just to become AWS certified. Now, I'm not saying that certification isn't good, because it can help you when it comes to getting a job if you're going to be, like an AWS developer or an AWS administrator. But really, for data scientists, you're not going for that. You're going to do a specific task, which is develop a data product, and that's going to be like an application here. And then you're going to have to use technologies around it to be able to accomplish. So you're going to have to be able to handle user data. So that might be utilizing, technology like MongoDB. You're going to have to be familiar with other technologies like APIs. And this one's for TidyQuant is for financial analysis. And then you're going to have be familiar with technologies like Amazon EC2, which is the server that will you'll actually make from scratch. And then you'll have to have technologies like Shiny Server that you actually install on Amazon EC2, and that allows you to run your application. So the key here is that it's probably not a best use of your time to try and just haul off and go learn Amazon or MongoDB, but rather what is a better use of your time is to learn by building an actual application and actually following that deployment process, so you see what it takes. And you learn the specific skill set to do that. So the remaining portion of this presentation, we're just going to talk about the technologies, and we're actually going to do a few demos just to showcase, what these technologies mean. So on this previous slide, we kind of had, I don't have Bootstrap or the front end stuff shown, but this is the back end, and then this is the cloud solution. So you can kind of see how it fits together. So the first technology that I want to talk about is actually the front end. And what I mean by front end is when you actually go to build an application utilizing Shiny, you're going to develop code that looks like this here, where it's actually R code. And what happens is that gets converted into HTML. And then it gets, and then when your app renders that, it actually looks like images, or these look like little value boxes. And the key technologies here are Shiny and Bootstrap. And when you put all of that together, you're then able to come up with an app that looks very aesthetically pleasing. you control the entire user interface, meaning you can actually position things where you want them to. You can add buttons to show and hide certain things. You can see that there's tabs here for different stocks that the user might want to favorite, and so on. So you're actually building this app from scratch, and you're utilizing Shiny and Bootstrap in order to be able to customize the look and appearance.
And that's one of my favorite things about Shiny that I've come across, because I think like throughout my career, I've programmed in maybe about 15 different languages. And through those years, I've seen a lot of different frameworks, and there's two frameworks that this reminds me of. And it's always been my favorite style of programming, because you can really create stuff quickly. You're working in essentially one language, but then that language is doing a lot of work for you behind the scenes. So if you learn the libraries and everything of Shiny, it's doing the Bootstrap for you. It was creating the HTML and CSS for you. It's creating the JavaScript for you. So you can just focus in on understanding the library and the language itself, and then the framework does all the work for you, which is really cool. And that's why I think it was the Waze, maybe the Waze quote was saying that he was able to get something up really quick. And that's really what the power of Shiny, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, productivity is everything. So you're capturing the ability to stand up an application quickly. The faster you can complete these projects, the better you're going to be able to help that organization, your organization, to be able to accomplish its objectives. So
yeah. I think actually, sorry, man, just saying it
take your time.
I was just going to say, saying it a different way, if you weren't using Shiny, you'd have to program each of these yourself. You'd have to do all the CSS yourself, all the JavaScript yourself, all of the calls between the database and, the client server interaction. So this facilitates a lot for you, which is what makes it really powerful.
Right. So here's an example of that. I want to show you. So this is the actual app that I built in the course, and this is the main app file. Here is the info card function, and this is just one of the info cards that we build. So an info card is just like makes a little value box. So when I convert this code, this is all R code. See, it's a .r file. So I'm making a function. And then when I add some attributes to it, so I'm adding Apple value 5.2%, sub value 20-day versus 50-day. And what it does is it produces this code here, which is actually HTML. So that's just one example where we take kind of our code and it makes things for us by making this HTML code. And then what you can do, so when I run my app, and I'm going to actually open this up in a new window. So what it's doing is opening up the Shiny app. Just going to log in, and it's actually running behind the scenes, pulling in all the stock data. So what that info card code did was it made each one of these. It was used iteratively to make each one of these value boxes. So for each one of my favorites, so I have Google, Netflix, Adobe, and Cisco. I've got these favorite cards here. So that's what Shiny allows us to do. One of the things it allows us to do is on the user interface end, when you combine it with this technology called Bootstrap, it allows us to really customize the look and appearance. So all of this was made basically utilizing Bootstrap code to build this application. Like I did not just download an application. I built this thing from scratch. I told it where to put all of my favorite cards. I told it where to put kind of this area here with the tabs. I told it where to put this little spot here for my settings, and so on. So all of this was predetermined by me, the developer, to be able to customize the look and appearance of the application. And you can make it however you want. It's super flexible. But that's one of the things that Shiny really helps us do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the second technology is databases, and it's basically the back end. So what I call backend, I kind of group it all together. I say, hey, it's managing databases, managing server side calculations. What are your thoughts on that, David? Is that basically what you think of the backend?
Yeah, the back end, and sometimes for more advanced applications, you'll have sort of a middle tier where maybe you have your APIs, and APIs can be your backend. So
Mm,
if you have, I know we talked about machine learning models being connected through an API using Plumber, I think it was.
yes. Yeah.
So that would be considered a backend as well, or
Uh,
middle layer to backend.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, so the back end databases and user management, there's two things that I kind of want to focus on. The first one is a lot of organizations require what's called authentication, and that's just to prevent um, undesirable people from accessing their data. So you only want to have specifically the people that are meant to see that application have access to that application. So that's what we're showing here is actually, I don't know if you guys noticed that, but when I pulled up the app initially, I had to log into it, and I typed in user one and then pass one for the password. And what that did was it allowed me it granted me access because that is an authenticated user. And then that, once I provided credentials that were authenticated and allowed to pass through, then behind the scenes, what that Shiny app is doing is it's storing those reactively in memory, and then each time, and it's also pulling from a database all of the settings and everything that are set up for that user. So that way, every time that user interacts with that application, it's a customized experience, and it's an experience. It basically it remembers the settings that are specific to that user. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about on when it comes to like back end is authentication. And then the second thing is remembering and having what's called persistent data storage. So this is an example here where we're using a technology called MongoDB. And if you've never heard of MongoDB, it's just a database. It's a little bit different than your normal SQL database because it stores values in an unstructured way. But you can see here that this is one object or one record in that database, and it's got a user one, pass one, it's got a permissions, it's got the name of that user, it's storing their favorites, meaning the favorite stocks that user has added, the last symbol that they selected, and then it's got some of their settings from that settings panel, that drop down. It's remembering what settings that user had. This is the code that does the read write to the database. And basically what it's doing is every time that user interacts with that application, it's reading and writing from that database when the user clicks the apply and save button, or when that user clicks the favorites button. So let's see an example of that. I'm just going to pause here for a quick demo. So here's the application. And what I want to do is I want to show you the back end that's behind this. So you can see that I've got Google, Netflix, Adobe, and Cisco, and those are the user's favorites. So when they hit the heart icon, that favorite's a stock. And then if I say I pick a new stock, I'll do Visa. And I'm going to heart that stock. So what it's doing behind the scenes is pulling the data for Visa, and now Visa is one of that user's favorites. So you can see it's right here, and it's also right here. So if I go to the back end, this is the back end. I'm actually just going to refresh it. So this is this product called MongoDB Atlas. It's a cloud solution that runs made by the company MongoDB. They make that NoSQL database. And what I can do in here is I can go and check out the records. And if I go to my favorites, I can see now Visa has been added to my favorites. And then I can also see the user settings are 28, 96, and 537. So if I go back here to my stock analyzer, and I can clear one of those favorites. So I'm going to remove Visa. And then I'm going to also change the settings. I want to show you that the database updates. So I'm going to max all of these settings out. I'm going to click the apply and save. Okay, so now that database should update, and it should remove Visa, and it should change these settings to 40, 120, and 730. And if I click the refresh button and go to user 1, I can see that Visa is no longer present, and those settings, they were maxed out to 40, 120, and 730. Okay, so this is what we call the backend. It's the ability to have a database that remembers for different users what they're doing, keeping track. And another example might be is if you have an application that you actually have that user entering in information. Shiny can actually be used for data acquisition. So if you have, I remember at my last company, I was building a kind of a database, and I had users actually entering in specific quotations as they would get them. They would enter in information, who was it from, what date did they get it, what date did they return the quotation, what is the deadline for the quotation, what was the quote value when we quoted it, and so on. So you can actually use Shiny for data acquisition just by tying it to a database like this. Okay. All right. And then the last one is deployment. So when we're talking about deployment, that means we're talking about how do we get that application from on our computer to being able to be on other people's computers. And typically what we're talking about is not actually distributing it to all of your different users of the app, but really hosting it on the web somewhere, either in the cloud or on premise on one of your servers. And what the theme here is that since companies are going to the cloud, we need to be teaching you how to build applications on the cloud. So the technologies that we're utilizing are AWS for the cloud hosting, Shiny Server, which is the open source version of Shiny, and that's the software that runs this application. And then also there's a technology called Docker, which is very useful for controlling the environment of that application, meaning what specific software, whether you're using Java or whether you're using specific versions of like the R packages that you're using, making sure that that's all controlled. Now, I will say this, and David, I don't know, actually, you might want to talk about this slide. We're trying to focus everyone. We're not trying to teach everything, but really the most critical skill sets in order to be able to actually build an application.
Yeah, I think this should really be the whole theme of this presentation, because I'm telling you, this stuff can get really convoluted quick. And quite often, people will start to say, well, why don't you use this and why aren't you using that? And yeah, we could use a different cloud service. However, we chose AWS because of its popularity and its position in the market. We chose MongoDB because of the type of data that the application uses. So NoSQL style database fits very well with the data that we're using. So, we're selecting products and services that fit well, also keeping the price low, and is focusing on the things you need to know in order to get an app into production successfully. So having it hosted on the cloud, having a database in operation, also having authentication for security, so not just anyone can access it. Right. And these selected technologies will do that for sure.
Yeah, and we did take a lot of user feedback when we were building the course. So I know specifically one of the things that users, for example, wanted to do was to be able to change the URL to something that matched their company. So we're going to be teaching things like Route 53, which is a URL. Basically, that way you don't see like a weird URL when somebody accesses your app. we're going to be teaching things like the VPC connection, which stands for Virtual Private Cloud, and what you actually have to do, because we're going to be using MongoDB and not DynamoDB. So we're not going to use Dynamo. The reason was because of cost. So Dynamo costs about $400 a month to run if you keep it running all month. So that's very expensive. And MongoDB Atlas, which is external to AWS, but very comparable to DynamoDB, it's free up to 512 megabytes. So that's why we chose that service. And because we chose that, we have to teach you VPC in order to be able to connect to that and have access.
And I think the other thing to mention here is a lot of this stuff falls into the category of like developer operations, or what's known as DevOps, or cloud administration. But it's very much in your capability to learn this stuff. I know there's a lot of terms thrown out right now and some stuff you may not be familiar with, but the key thing to remember is you need to be able to get your app on a host and then have it accessible only to the people that need to get to it.
Yes.
And so we're picking the technologies that can allow you, that will allow you to set that up, and then have it be used by yourself or stakeholders, whomever else.
Right. Yeah. And you're going to learn a lot too. So Amazon EC2, that's probably one of the most critical skill sets. It's the compute. It's the first one here. You're going to learn that. You're going to get very familiar with it, and you're going to be able to use that for a lot more than just building applications. Anytime, even if you want to, set up your own personal server, for example, you'll now at least be familiar with Amazon EC2, and you'll be able to do it. So, cool. Yeah. So that's basically what we teach. The idea here, just really to bring this home, is we want to give businesses what they need. And going into 2020, that's applications, that's cloud technologies. We're seeing, the growth in that Cisco, global index. We're seeing Department of Defense, sign a $10 billion cloud contract. And we're also seeing companies like Safe Auto and Waze that are building these applications, and it's really allowing them to democratize data science and allow the rest of the organization to be able to utilize data and machine learning to their advantage. So it's a lot to learn. The key is to be focused. The key is to kind of pick and choose the ones that matter to your project. For our course, what we're teaching is AWS for our cloud technology. We're teaching Bootstrap for the front end because that's what Shiny's built on top of, and it's one of the major front end frameworks that are out there. We're teaching MongoDB for the back end. That's just because for our user data, that kind of has like a nested or unstructured structure to it. It works really well. We're using Shiny Server because that's what technology you need to be able to run Shiny apps on the cloud. And then we're using Docker to be able to make sure that application, the environment, is controlled. So it's a lot to learn, but the good news is that we've made it super simple. You could independently try and learn all of the different things, and that'll take you a while. Or we've got the new course that I just launched here last week. We already have over 60 students in it. It's the Shiny Developer with AWS course. It's broken up into 4 different parts. And the idea is you follow a step-by-step build and deployment process. So again, it's the way that I like to learn, which is by doing an actual project and seeing how all of the technologies integrate. So you start with the Shiny Jumpstart, and that's where you build kind of the basic framework for your application. Doesn't look very pretty, but it's actually got most of the technology that you're going to build on later. Then you move to front end, and you're learning Shiny and Bootstrap to make it look a lot more aesthetically pleasing, and also to control the look and the feel of the app. Then you do the back end, and you're learning things like MongoDB for the database. You're learning how to authenticate users for security. And then once you're done with that, the 4th piece, which is like the big bang, And this is what everyone wants to know, which is how to take applications into production and to kind of close the gap on that last mile, which is actually deploying an app. And you're going to learn technologies like AWS, Shiny, and Docker. And that's all in this course right here. It's DS4B 202A-R, Expert Shiny Developer with AWS. The key benefits of the course, we already kind of talked about it, but you're learning front end, you're learning back end, so MongoDB, dynamic UI, user authentication, and then production, AWS, you're learning EC2, how to make a VPC connection, URL routing, and more. So this is the application framework, and you can see all the different kind of technologies that lift that application up, and that's what you're learning. We've already have a couple of students' success stories, or I should say, they're still very early on in the course. But this is a consultant. His name is Miguel Urcel. Just today, he said this is the perfect course for learning how to develop advanced and amazing-looking shiny web apps. And he said that in our Slack channel. We have Jonathan Regenstein, who is the director of financial services at our studio. He just sent this out today as well, and he's on the render section on dynamic UI training, where he's using this render UI function, and he's seeing how it can be used for all of the different skills that you're going to need to use it for, and it's a very flexible function. And he says, I'm learning something new every day. I've used render UI before, but I did not realize its full capabilities, and he's just having a good time with the course. And he works at our studio, so he knows this product, he loves this product, but he's still learning more from taking the courses. So just to wrap up here, Business Science University, it's designed to take you from whatever skill level you're at to within 6 months, making you an expert. That's the transformation that I promise you if you're committed to the courses. This is what the system looks like. So most of what we talked about is this last kind of mile here. But if you're starting fresh and you've never done data science before, we've got a 4-course R-Track system that is all integrated to help teach you the concepts that you need in order to be able to get here. So it does that within 6 months. The first 7 weeks is the 101, where you're learning foundations. You're learning things like data cleaning, visualization, machine learning, business reporting. The second course is advanced machine learning and business consulting. So you're learning H2O, automated machine learning. You're following that framework, which is the business science problem framework. So you know how to do consulting and how to really analyze a business problem and generate ROI with it. And you're learning a lot of advanced techniques in the process. And then there's now 2 web apps courses. The first one is kind of like the beginner, where you learn Flex Dashboard, and then it gets you familiar with Shiny, and you learn HTML and CSS. And then in the second one, that's where you take your apps into production, and you learn a little bit more high-end Bootstrap. You learn how to connect to databases, MongoDB, how to save user data, authenticate, and then also how to do AWS, which is taking that app from being on your computer and actually hosting it in the cloud using Amazon EC2 and a few other technologies. And then I do have a 20% promotion if you guys are interested. This week, it ends on Friday. It's for the Shiny developer launch. So you can get the whole system, or you can actually apply this to any of the individual courses as well. It's the Shiny dev launch. And David, you mind sharing the link for the discount so everyone has it?
Yeah, I'll put it in there now.
Okay, perfect. And then there's 2 different options for you. So each one of these courses, they range from between $399 and $499 a piece. But if you buy them as a bundle, you end up saving like $400 or $500. So basically, it drops the price of one of the course when you bundle them all together. And then there's also some payment plans. If you want to do a 12-month payment plan, that's available as well. So that is that's the special deal that we have going on. We're in the final week of the Shiny Apps, the developer with AWS course launch. It's going really well. we've got a ton of students. We've got over 60 in there already, and more each day. And I look forward to having you in it as well. David, do you want to? Should we handle some questions now?
There's actually not many. I've
Oh, really?
answered a bunch of them. Yeah,
Okay,
but
sweet, good.
I think one thing I'll say is a couple of things. A lot of folks were talking about what are the prerequisites for the Shiny course. So you may want to answer that. I've answered it in the Q&A, but I think you may be able to be a little bit more concise with it.
Yeah. So the prereqs for the 202 course, if you've never worked with Shiny before, then you want to take the 102 course first, and that's what gets you familiar with Shiny. It teaches you Flex Dashboard, which is an easier way to use Shiny. But it also teaches you things like HTML and CSS and how to customize applications, and kind of know more behind the scenes what's going on. 202 kind of expects that baseline of knowledge. Now, I will say, if you've already coded with Shiny, and I mean not Flex Dashboard, so there's a difference between the two. If you coded an app like in Shiny Dashboard or something like that before, then you're probably prepared to take this 202 course, and that's what I would say is kind of the cutoff. If you've never done Shiny before, take the 102. If you've done Shiny before, then just jump right into the 202.
Okay. What's the average time total or weekly spend that you spend on each course?
5 to 10 hours per week is what I recommend, and that'll help you to complete. If you stick with that schedule, about 6 months to complete all 4 of these courses. If you can do more than that, I have heard that this one, somebody knocked out this one and this one within 3 weeks, which is insane, because that must be like all they did for 3 weeks straight. But that's the fastest I've ever heard to get them be completed.
LJ asks, many of these types of classes teach how to develop web apps for users within a company. With this class, can you deliver outside of the company?
Yeah, I mean, you can stand it up on your own personal AWS account and deploy it, on using your own personal cloud. As long as you have a domain, you can use your own domain and set it up, host it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually how we're using it. I mean, it's pretty much you create your own server and host it. So, and that's one of the things that we really want to teach within the course, is using authentication, so that it can be out online and other people can access it if they have the username and password.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about the authentication piece, is that none of your app renders until the user has actually entered in the correct credentials. So there's no hidden, nothing, no UI data or whatever that's hidden in the app. It's actually not rendered using JavaScript until the application has been authenticated. So it's completely secure.
Josh asked, what's going to be in 202BR?
So 202B is going to be more of the machine learning again, and then some of the concepts that we haven't had a chance to discuss a whole lot, like a user entering in, actually using Shiny for data acquisition, utilizing some of the machine learning for what-if analysis, that sort of thing. Some of the kind of newer aesthetics. So Bootstrap 4 is out now, and there's a couple of frameworks that are out there that are really very high end. And it's mainly to focus on projects too. So less on deployment, more on, getting you some reps building more of these applications. Because once you get deployment down, it's just kind of rinse and repeat. But the actual building of the applications and the feedback that I'm getting is that the students want multiple apps. So you can only do so much in one course. And I think if I would have tried to do like it all in one course, it would have been too confusing, and it would be really big too. So it would not have worked out that well.
For sure. And I think this is it's a good balance in my mind, because it's teaching the data scientist how she or he can actually put their work online. Now, if you're in a company where your IT department handles all the AWS stuff, they're going to do the work, but at least you can communicate some of the technologies and specifics with them. Or if you're doing your own side project or you're consulting, this is something you can do on your own as well. So it's really a nice balance that gives you benefits, whichever, given whichever situation you're in.
Yeah, it's also really good too for companies that are looking at developing like subscription-based app services. So like,
Yeah.
for example, there's like a bunch of like bigger consulting companies that they can begin to host their apps on their own cloud, giving their clients access to those apps and then charging them a monthly fee to continue to have access to those applications. So for companies that are looking at developing subscription revenue, that are already doing, data analytics, but want a way to actually generate revenue for the company, I'm seeing some demand there as well. So there's a couple of companies that I'm working with on that specific action right now.
Yeah. All right, I think that might be it. If there's no more questions, I guess we'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much for attending. I hope you found value in this. We're super excited about Shiny and getting more people involved in the technology.
Yep. And we'll be, this is an entire presentation is recorded. I'm going to put it on YouTube, and also the slide deck will be on YouTube as well. If you want to, or not on YouTube, but I'll be emailing that out probably tomorrow. So, so you guys will have access to all of this information if you want to share it with anyone.
Awesome. All right. Take care, everyone. We'll see
All
you
right.
soon.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.